So Christos Anesti, everyone. Today we celebrate the disbelieving Thomas, great apostle, Thomas the apostle. But before we get into tonight's topic, I would like to just answer a few questions that came in from the last session. And so one of the questions is very simple. It says, do you think it's okay to watch divine liturgy from our homes? Of course it's not okay, and I hope it goes away soon, because liturgy is really a great supper. It is a supper, it's a supper of the Lord, and we go to liturgy so we can commune, so we can partake of the body and blood of Christ. I believe this is something very temporary, and personally, I would rather listen to a liturgy on the radio, and I guess it's okay for people who are bedridden, but this is a great economy that the church is doing just to at least keep us connected and give us a little consolation through these difficult times that we are going through. So the idea of the liturgy is to be divine liturgy. We need the uncreated grace of God. That's what makes it divine. So we need to be partaking of the body and blood of the Lord. So that does take place, but unfortunately, it only takes place with 3 or 4 or 5 people. Hebrews 2:25, St. Paul says, admonishes the Christians to not forsake the assembly of ourselves together. So liturgy is for us to become the body of Christ. We really become the church when we get together and commune the body and blood of the Lord. The second question has to do with Lazarus, and the question is, how did Lazarus walk to the front of the grave? Now remember that there was a number of steps that he needed to walk to come up and be in front of the grave, and he was tied up. He was totally bound according to the custom of the Jews. So how did he get there? Well, we said in the class that whatever we cannot do, something that it's not possible for us to do, then God will do for us. So in this situation, that's why we have the holy angels, and we see how the holy angels served the resurrection of the Lord and how they helped the myrrh-bearing women, and how they are there to assist us. So most likely, we don't know exactly how he made it up the stairs and came to the front of the cave, but most likely one of the angels helped him out. And then after that, what the people could do, they did it. They simply unbounded and untied his strips of linen. The third question says, do you know how to get a hold of Constantine Zalalas? Because in a lecture, he denied the primacy of the Apostle Peter. This is inappropriate because he contradicts the fathers of the church. Now, I pray and hope that this person is not Orthodox. Most likely it's one of the catechumens, or perhaps someone who's watching our YouTube channel. And again, I believe that this question is not from an Orthodox person, but we'll answer it anyway. We published an entire book on this, my Exodus from Roman Catholicism. I'm just about out of print. It's still available at St. Anthony's Monastery. And also in this wonderful little booklet called Loving Truth, our Archbishop Michael of blessed memory says in one of his articles that quite possibly Peter only got to Rome when he was going to be a martyr. And we have no records that he was ever the bishop of Rome. Not to mention that if Peter was the bishop of Rome or the apostle of Rome, St. Paul would have never written a letter to the Romans. So St. Peter is not the foundation of the church, as this young man or young person tried to say, that the church fathers say that he is the foundation of the church. I don't know which church fathers say this, perhaps some Western fathers, but this is anti-scriptural because if St. Peter was the head of the apostles, then that would show up in the first apostolic synod that took place in Jerusalem in the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 15, verse 19, where not Peter, but St. James took charge. St. James, the brother of the Lord, and not Peter. He was the presiding hierarch of that synod. So Peter is not the head of the church. James took charge and said, therefore, I judge that we should not trouble the Gentiles and make them circumcised. So it was St. James who was a presiding bishop, and yes, St. Peter is one of the pillars of the church, great apostle, but certainly not the foundation of the church, because we see in the book of the Revelation 21:14. Now the walls of the city. Now in Revelation 21, and we have finished Revelation volume 5. It should be published sometime in the near future. So in Revelation 21:14, we have St. John looking at New Jerusalem, at the city coming down from heaven. And he says, now the wall of the city has 12 foundations, and on them were the names of the 12 apostles. So from this verse and everything else that I mentioned, we see that Apostle Peter is a great apostle, but one of the 12, and we know of no primacy in the Orthodox Church. So now we will try to go through today's gospel and also the personality of St. Thomas, who's very sympathetic to us because we all doubt. You know, we call him the unbelieving Thomas, the doubting Thomas, but he was really a great apostle. And he was one of the youngest apostles. And we have to understand how this happened and why it happened. This started from Holy Week, when Christ told them, tonight the shepherd will be struck and the sheep will be scattered. And he also told them, hold vigil and pray so you will not fall into temptation, because many of you are going to be scandalized because of me tonight. You're going to be scandalized because of my name. And that's when Peter, the great apostle, gets up and makes the statement, Lord, everybody else will deny you, everybody else will leave you, but I will never leave you. That's when Christ told him that before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So that temptation was great for all the apostles. So in today's gospel, we saw that the resurrected Lord, after he appeared to the Virgin Mary, and we'll talk about that next week, that Christ appeared to the most holy Theotokos first. The most holy Theotokos was the first person to see the resurrected Christ. And we will explain that by using the Gospel of John, although the Gospel of Mark seems to say something different. Mary Magdalene saw the Lord, and the Lord told him, tell the disciples to go somewhere in Galilee. And also in last night's Vespers, we see that the Lord charged them not to depart from Jerusalem, but to wait there until they be clothed with power from on high. So after the resurrection, Christ appeared to the disciples at least 11 times. The first time when he appeared to the apostles, to the 10, for some reason, Thomas was not there. Thomas was stressed out. He couldn't believe that after all those 3 years and following the Messiah and believing in the Messiah, and then after all this, yes, he was scandalized just like the rest of the apostles. But I think personality of Thomas was a little bit different. Perhaps he was somewhat of a pessimist. Instead of being with the rest of the apostles, and this is a great lesson for us, when we have difficulty, when things are really difficult, that's the time to get together with some brothers and sisters in Christ to strengthen each other. And that's what the other apostles did. They followed the commandment of the Lord, who told them through Mary Magdalene to be together, to gather together. But Thomas was so stressed out, and perhaps he went to his home, having to deal with all these thoughts. Finally, when he gets to the apostles, when he gets back to see them, they tell him, "We saw the Lord." And that's when he said, "Okay, you saw him, but for me to believe, I have to put my finger in his wounds, and I have to put all my hand in his side." And the apostles probably told him, "But listen, Thomas, you saw all those miracles, all those years. We followed him. Why don't you believe?" And he continued to be in disbelief. So it's not that Thomas was faithless. He didn't lose his faith. His faith was shaken. His faith was shaken. He needed more proof. And he kept that position. Unless I see him, I'm not going to believe. This is really contradictory. When somebody is saying that for me to believe, I have to see it, then I'm contradicting myself. What is faith? Faith is to believe in something that is not seen. Heraclea lives here. She's not in this room. So I believe if she's not in his room, I can say that in this room, I believe that she's in her room upstairs. But Dimitra is here. So I see Dimitra. I can't say, well, I believe Dimitra is right here in front of me. That doesn't make any sense. I know that she is in front of me. So there's a difference between faith and knowledge. So Christ wanted us to have the element of faith because this faith was going to be very important and extremely necessary because they would need all this faith for the mission that he would put in their hands in the years to come. So as Christians, we are supposed to go from faith to knowledge to love. As Christians, we don't believe that Christ exists. We know Christ. We know Christ and we love him. But this was the psychology of Thomas at the time, who, again, he says, for me to believe and to be reassured, I have to see with my own eyes. And not only that, I'm not even going to trust my eyes because sometimes, our eyes can fool us. So I'm not even going to trust my eyes because it can be a ghost. It can be another person. And this is exactly why Christ was resurrected with his wounds, not just for that reason, but also these wounds would show that he resurrected with the identical body that he had on earth and not with another body. Because if his wounds were healed and he didn't have his wounds, somebody could say that, well, he just entered into another body. It's not really his body. Thomas, by doing this, and this is all over the hymnology of the church, by doing this, he did a great favor to us. He did a great favor to the church. It says, by doing this, he strengthened the faith of the church. Not to mention that even the other apostles were in disbelief. They also doubted. In today's gospel, in the Matins, it was the gospel of Matthew. And even when Christ appeared to them in Galilee, many of the disciples, many worshiped him, but some doubted. Christ appeared in front of and this was Sunday night, a week later, 8 days after the first appearance of Christ to the 10. He went straight to Thomas. Now, how did he know? Of course, Christ is everywhere, he knows everything, but Christ was always there. For those 40 days, he will always be next to his disciples. It's just that they will not be able to see him. So he will appear to them when he wants to. But he was always there listening to his disciples and being in their company. So when Christ tells Thomas, come and touch me, come and put your hand in the print of the nails. And immediately after that, Thomas just expresses all the love because he was a great disciple. He really loved the Lord. Thomas was very young. He was a fisherman. He followed the Lord. He watched the Lord through the 3 years. At some point, when we mentioned 2 weeks ago, when they were ready to go to resurrect Lazarus, And Christ says, we have to go back to Jerusalem. The other disciple says, look, they were trying to stone us. What are we doing? Why should we go back? And Thomas was the one who said, let us go back with him so we can die with him, which means he had great love for the Lord. And he was saying, okay, it's dangerous back there, but if they're going to kill the Lord, I'd rather die too. This is basically the love Thomas had in his heart. But just like everybody else, he became scandalized. And now when he sees the Lord, he just expresses, and all his love pours out of his heart. And he cries out, he bows down to the Lord and says, my Lord and my God. And this confession of Thomas is probably the most powerful confession in the New Testament. Even more powerful than Peter, who says, you are Christ, the Son of God. You are the Messiah. And also Nathanael made the same confession, and even the Samaritan woman. But Thomas and this possessive pronoun, it just shows all the expression and all the love of this disciple who is totally elated to see his master in front of him. And then Christ tells him, become believing. Yinu pistos. You almost lost your faith. Regain. Take your faith back. Yinu. Become faithful. Become believing. Which shows that our faith can vacillate through different times of our life. There's certain things that can reduce our faith. When we're talking to people who are unbelievers, when we see things on different programs, and if our faith is not strong enough, we're speaking to heretical people that have false ideas about the gospel, then that's a danger that our faith can decrease. Like right now, we see that how a lot of people in this crisis, fear comes in. And what is fear? The lack of definite faith, and also the lack of great love for the Lord. Perfect love casts out all fear. So Thomas listens to the Lord who says, become believing. You need to regain that faith back because you're going to need it. And yes, come and touch my side and become believing. And of course, even the other apostles also touched him. Perhaps they touched him during the first time they saw him. So again, they needed this affirmation of faith in the resurrection. The resurrection of Christ is something that we need to be adamant about, because unfortunately there's many people outside of the church today, theologians outside of the church, bishops outside of the church, that do not believe in the resurrection of Christ. They lost their faith. St. Paul says, if Christ did not resurrect, Matea ipisti Simon, if Christ did not resurrect, then our faith is in vain. If Christ didn't resurrect, then we're not going to resurrect. So we might as well be like the Epicureans. So that's why Christ stayed for 40 days to strengthen and reaffirm and confirm the faith of the apostles. Time after time again. He appeared to the apostles many, many times, but in the Gospels we see that he appeared at least 11 times. Christ told Thomas, after he made that great confession, my Lord and my God, which of course pleased Christ, but at the same time he told Thomas, because you saw me, you believe. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet believe. There's different levels of faith, because it's not just the faith in the existence of Christ or the resurrection, but faith it's a journey. We have to continue to believe not just in the existence of Christ, in the resurrection of Christ, but in the providence of Christ, in the providence of God. They needed to believe all the words that he taught him. Go out and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to keep everything that I have taught you. It's not enough just to make disciples of all nations, but you need to teach them to uphold and keep everything I have commanded you. So many people today want to see a miracle. Because I wish I could see something to strengthen my faith. This is exactly what the rich man, when he was burning in Hades, when he told Abraham, Father Abraham, please send Lazarus back to my family, to my village, to see him. That way they would believe. And Abraham says, no, even if they see him, they will not believe. They have the prophets, they have the word of God, they have the Old Testament. If they don't believe the prophets, they're not even going to believe when a person resurrects from the dead. I mean, look at the Pharisees. They saw the resurrected Lazarus. Not only they didn't believe, but they wanted to kill Christ, but also Lazarus. At some point, Father Epiphanios Theotokos in Athens, he was on a train. And the train stopped, or I believe stopped for about 15, 20 minutes. And everybody was saying that there was a church outside and there was a miraculous icon that was weeping. And in a few seconds, the whole train emptied. And they all went out to venerate the icon. Father Epiphanios continued to read the scriptures on the train, whatever he was doing. He didn't move, he didn't budge. So then all these good Christians who ran to venerate the icon, when they came in, they were saying, what's wrong with you, Father? You don't believe. He says, wait a second. I believe. That's why I didn't go. I know there's miraculous icons. It happens all the time. To me, it's a fact. But you doubted and you went to see. Sometimes we do these things out of curiosity, to go see. That's exactly what Herod did. When Pilate took Christ to Herod, he says, go ahead, do a miracle. Do a miracle. He wanted to see a miracle. And Christ did not do a miracle in front of Herod. So Thomas, after the ascension and during Pentecost, all the apostles, they cast lots. And each apostle was given his territory where he would go to preach the gospel. And as you know, Thomas, being one of the youngest apostles, was given one of the most difficult missions. The lot fell for Persia, India, Middle Persia, all that region. That was a very difficult territory because they were all pagans. They were barbarians. Where the other apostles would go to Alexandria, where you had everybody spoke Greek. The other apostles would go to Asia Minor. They go to Ephesus. They go to Pontus. They would go to Greece, to St. Paul, and they could speak the language. But poor Thomas, what? India? What am I going to do in India? I don't speak the language. I don't know anything about India. Imagine if somebody would ask me tomorrow to go to Central Africa, or if I would have to go to Korea. I don't know a word of Korean. I would get upset. And this is exactly what happened to Thomas. Thomas sat there and he was grieving. He was like, what am I going to do? And while thinking again, the Lord appeared to him and told him, Thomas, don't worry. I will be with you. My grace will be with you. I will be with you always. And this is the kind of faith that Christ was really trying to teach the apostles all through the 40 days. Lo, I will be with you always. I will always be with you. And we seem to forget that. We forget that Christ told us when there's 2 or 3 of us gather in his name, Christ is there with us and we have nothing to fear. But as human beings, we forget these things. And Christ arranged the whole thing. And in a day or 2, he meets a merchant called Amvani, who came from one of the regions of India, who was looking for a master builder to build a palace for his king. So Christ appears to Amvani, the merchant, and says, hey, I have a very good slave for you. I got a great slave. He's a great builder, and I can sell him to you. Now Christ appeared like a regular person. And he says, okay, really, I'll buy him. Well, 3 liters of silver, whatever the exchange for a slave was back then. And Christ takes this, and the next day, he gives it to Thomas. He says, look, you go with this Amvani fellow, and I will be with you. Just follow him and serve him. And then Amvani goes to Thomas and says, are you his slave? He says, yes. He bought me at a great price. Bought me with his blood. So they go to India, and the first town that they went in, they were invited to a wedding. The mayor or the ruler of that town was having the wedding of his son. And everybody was invited, so they invited Thomas to the wedding, along with this unfunny fellow, the merchant. So Thomas sat there in a very strange country with strange customs. Thomas is sitting there in deep thought. He's thinking, how am I going to deal with this? And at that moment, a servant comes up and smacks Thomas in the face and tells him, what is wrong with you? Here, we're supposed to be happy, and you have a long face. And Thomas says, may God forgive you for this in the other life, but in this life, your hand is going to be ripped off by wild animals. Now, he said this in Hebrew, so this man didn't understand a thing. However, one of the entertainers that was playing some kind of an instrument, a young woman who was Jewish, she heard this, but she didn't say a thing. Well, 5 minutes later, this servant went outside to get water, and a wild animal attacks him, kills him, rips him apart, and then the house dogs took his hand and began to parade it through the wedding reception. And people saw this and they panicked. And then this woman, when she saw this, she said, wow, the gods have visited us. This is either an apostle or God himself. This man just prophesied this. He said this 5 minutes ago. I heard it because this man is from my country. So immediately, the governor or the ruler invites him and says, if your curse has such power, then I want you to bless my children. Please, give me a blessing. Bless my children so they can have a great life. Now, Dimitar, you might not like this because you're engaged with George here, but, it doesn't happen all the time, okay? So Thomas goes in there and begins to speak to them, to bless them, and within 45 minutes to an hour, he convinces them to keep virginity and give their life to Christ. Imagine the grace coming out of the apostle for these two people who loved each other, obviously, to just immediately followed Thomas. The same thing happened to Saint Thecla, the first woman martyr. Saint Thecla, who was engaged to someone, when she heard Saint Paul speak, immediately she left her fiancé and started running and following, becoming a disciple of Saint Paul. Saint Thomas blessed them. He gave them some instruction how to live, and then he leaves. And then the groom sees someone who looked like Paul talking to his wife. And he goes and says, listen, I saw you walk out the door. And he says, I am his brother. I am his brother. And if you listen to me, then I will give you my kingdom. It was Christ. Christ appeared to them and strengthened these two young people who stayed up all night praising God. And in the morning, when the father-in-law and the father went peek and see how happy these two lovebirds are, when he didn't see them in bed together, he says, where's that imposter? What did he do to you? What is wrong with you? Why are you apart? And he explained that this man of God explained to us that we're going to have a great life in the life to come if we continue to follow the commandments of his God. Well, obviously, he tried to arrest Thomas, but he couldn't find him, and Thomas would only appear to these two people and strengthen him. So he went to the king of India, and there he tried to build a palace for the king. The king asked him, I heard you're a builder. He says, yes, I can build great things. You just let me know what you want. I want you to build a great palace for me. Can you do the blueprints? So Thomas went and drew the blueprints and showed it to him. And says, oh, yeah, that's wonderful. Get started. Well, I need a lot of gold. It's going to cost a lot of money. So he gives them money. Thomas takes the money, goes to the poor section of India, poor villages, and begins to give all the money to the poor. And he's beginning to preach, help them financially, preach the gospel, baptize them, and begin to build the church. The king went away for 3 years. So after 3 years, when he came back, invites Thomas and says, hey, how's my palace coming along? Oh, it's great. It's almost finished. I just need the roof, but I need some more gold. Takes the money again, goes, and he gives all the money to the poor, and he continues to do his ministry. And at some point, when some people came from that area, and the king asked them, hey, how's my palace coming? What palace? There's nothing there. And immediately, he goes and has St. Thomas arrested. He brings him back, and he says, You're such a crook. Why did you do this to me? And the brother of a king became so sad. He probably had a health problem. He had a heart attack because he felt that how his brother was duped so badly. How can this happen to his brother? He loved his brother, and he had a heart attack, and he died. And the angel of the Lord takes him up, and the angel tells him, pick one of those nice homes here in paradise. Okay, there are no palaces in paradise. It is just images for us to be able to understand some things about paradise. But when he saw this great palace. He says, I want to stay in that mansion. Christ says there's many mansions in my Father's house. Well, this brother of the king of India, he says, I want that mansion. Oh, no. That mansion belongs to your brother. Thomas built this for your brother. And he says, well, wait a second now. I can't come here. Then you need to let me go back so I can give Thomas money so he can also build a palace for me. And he says, okay, so the angel sends him back. He goes back to his brother and says, brother, can you do me a huge favor? I mean, after he became alive again, of course, his brother was extremely thrilled. And he says, yes, anything. Can you sell me the palace in paradise? And he says, what? Yeah, the palace that Thomas built you. I saw it. It's in paradise. It's beautiful. Just sell it to me. I give you all my belongings. And he says, now wait a second. I made a promise, but this was for this earth. Paradise or heaven is out of my jurisdiction. I can't keep that promise. Because now you get curious. So after this, they brought Thomas back. And of course, they honored him because he saw that he actually built him a palace in heaven. So this is how the ministry in India got started. And 10 years after this, Thomas was invited to go back for the Dormition of the Panagias. He left India, and again, just like when he was away from the 10 apostles during the resurrection of Christ, at least the first time he appeared to them, he also got there 3 days late. And God permitted this so the apostles would be able to see what happened to the body of the Panagia. So after her Dormition, all the apostles took the body of the Panagia and they put her in the tomb in Gethsemane. But now 3 days later, Thomas comes and he is beginning to demand and ask, no, I also need to see the body of the Panagia. I have to see her too. She's the mother of my God too. So he convinced them to open the tomb of the Panagia, and they saw that her body was no longer there. Just like he witnessed the resurrection of Christ, he also witnessed the resurrection of the Panagia 3 days after her Dormition. We don't call it the resurrection of the Panagia, we call it the ascension of the Panagia. And the Panagia is the only person in the kingdom of God with her body. Everybody else is in paradise. Paradise means just souls. When somebody dies, they go to paradise if they are with Christ, if they are believers, or they go to Hades. Χριστός Ανέστη εκ νεκρών θανάτων, θάνατον πατήσας και έτσι εν της μνήμας η ζωή χαρισάμενος.